Hey friend, in this video I am going to be painting this peony illustration that I did in my sketchbook a few weeks ago. Les fleurs, I wrote in the top left corner. I'm using a size 10 round brush. This is one of my go-tos from Princeton, the Heritage 4050 series. All the links to all the supplies that I use are in the description of every single YouTube video. So if you're curious, make sure you check the bottom area. I'm using a little bit of permanent red light and a little bit of primary yellow mixed into a tea/coffee consistency. And I like to, once I have one of the petals down, if it's near the center, I like to go in with wet and wet technique and drop in a little bit more yellow where the stamen area is to just give it this fuzzy, peachy glow behind the stamen. And then I'm just using wet and wet technique for now. And my round brush is all I'm going to be using to kind of glide over all of these open sections of each one of these petals. If you want a more detailed step-by-step breakdown of how to paint a peony in a more realistic style, I have a great video for you on my YouTube channel that I'll link to in this video. So for these outside petals and also the curled over parts of petals, I like to do even lighter washes of the same peachy color. So I'm, rinsing off in the water and making sure that it's a bit more light so you can see the transition between one petal to another. And one thing to really pay attention to here is to not have too much water on your brush when you're going to the paper. If you add too much water, it's okay. You can always dab it up with a paper towel or a dry brush and lift it. But just be mindful of that. You don't want any puddling. You don't want any puddling that will create hard lines and cauliflowers. And so I'm just kind of starting to add in those lighter petals and drop in some slightly darker color. I just lifted there because there was too much pigment in water. And I'm using this little scrubbing technique in between bigger strokes to make sure that it blends cohesively and nice and smooth. The pen that I used is a Faber-Castell illustration pen, which I'll link to in the description of this video as well. But as you can see, it does not bleed. And the sketchbook is, I'm sorry, but I found it at a small art shop in Florence, Italy. And I don't know the brand because it doesn't have a name on it, so I can't tell you what the brand is, but it definitely feels like cold press paper, 140 pound, 300 GSM. And it works pretty well, so it must be probably 100% cotton. So now I've got a little bit of a darker pigment on my brush, and I punched that into the center, so you got that nice gradient bleed between a darker and a lighter color. And now I'm grabbing some burnt umber, mixing it in with my peachy color. And down here next to the stamen area, I just want to plug in some of this color and kind of just fan it out to add a bit of shadow and dimension. Because these petals are kind of hugging in, they would be more in shadow than the ones that are falling outward on the outside of the flower. Adding water, making sure to dab the excess water so it's not too much. And glazing over all of these petals, adding shadow towards the base of the petals with just a thicker consistency of the same mixture of red and yellow and a little bit of brown. I like to keep the folded over parts of petals lighter and the ones inside, because they would be in shadow, have a little bit more pigment. But this is a really simple and easy practice to do. If you're confident with drawing flowers, which if you aren't, I have a great video for you on my YouTube channel that'll teach you all the steps, and you'll be very surprised at how, I'm not going to say easy, but much easier it is when you understand where to put petals and how to draw a flower from basic shapes. So make sure you go check out that video, how to sketch a realistic flower, on my channel. And then you can draw something like this, and then it just kind of takes away the scariness of painting a detailed flower like this when you do it, when you illustrate it first, when you do the outlines first. And then once you practice this a few times, it feels less intimidating doing something just with paint. So I'm going in and lifting some of this color to fade and make sure that there's a clear transition between the petals that are overlapping each other. And now I've got sap green and adding that to my stem, keeping my stems and leaves pretty simple, just coloring in the lines. Some of the leaves are lighter than others or have more water in the mixture than others, so that they're lighter and more transparent. Adding in some green here and there to the peach that's still a little bit wet. And this is a very, very simple, easy way to add color to your sketchbook. Now I've got a clean damp brush, and I was just kind of wiggling out some of those hard lines before it dries. Now I've got my size 2 round brush from the same Princeton Heritage 4050 series. And now we're going to be adding in thicker, creamier consistency of color to add an even darker shadow and to pull out the individual stamen. So mostly going into these inner petals and weaving around the stamen. This color is burnt umber, permanent red light, and a little bit of yellow. A little bit more burnt umber than the previous mixtures. And the thicker the consistency is here, the better, because I'm still working a little bit wet on wet. These petals are still slightly damp. So I don't want this color to blend and bleed too much, because then it's going to create cauliflowers. So if it's thicker, it won't bleed as aggressively. And then I'm going around the outer edge of these inner petals to pull out this separate petal, and also going up the lines for the wrinkles in the petal. Adding in some shadow to the curve. And this one wasn't totally wet, so I'm just gonna cheat and go backwards. So I'm adding water and pulling the darker color that I added to make it a gradient. Kind of glazing on top of the base layer with my water. There's always ways to work around little things that you might think are mistakes. There's always ways to work around with it, especially adding water, lifting color with paper towel or a clean, damp brush, or glazing over something, there's usually a fix. As you can see, that shadow color underneath that petal just makes that fold of the petal really pop out. Bringing in even more dark color. So you go in stages and you go little bits at a time so that you make sure to not overdo it. And as you go, things remain wet because you're adding little bits at a time, so you can kind of massage it around or lift it up still if you need to. So I'm just gradually adding thicker and thicker color to these shadow areas as I go. Outlining that edge and then taking water to blend it up in and create a dark to light gradient. Still too much pigment, so I'm adding even darker pigment to the bottom. And I want to fade that out. Getting as light as possible by lifting some of the top edge of the color. I'm adding in a hue to this petal that's pretty similar to the petal that it's right up against. So that edge I want to make sure is really faded. So I'm lifting some of that color. And just going around each petal, adding in darker color, glazing, adding water if I need to lift anything or blend it out. And continuing until I feel satisfied with how it's popping off the page. And for this painting, drawing, whatever, I don't have any reference photos for it. I've drawn and painted probably thousands of peonies in my lifetime. And because I illustrate these flowers in a way that's kind of in a traditional Japanese style of doing these basic shapes and C curves, which is more broken down in the Sketching a Realistic Flower video I have on this channel. I can kind of twist and turn and put these flowers in any position and draw it from imagination or draw it from these basic shapes, essentially. So I'm not, thinking about light source or anything like that, but I am pretty familiar with how these flowers look, where shadows would go, and it's basically just, if something is covered, if it has a fold over it, we're going to have shadow right beneath that fold to separate the fold from the open part of the petal. And most of that color is concentrated in the center of these flowers as petals continue to fall outwards. They're more faded and about to fall off the flower, and they usually lose their color at that stage, or most of their color. Adding a bit more color to this outer petal and switching to my size 10 brush with water to blend that color up and in and fade it out. That's nice. A little bit more. While it's wet, it'll blend nice and fuzzy with wet and wet technique. Dry brush to go in and soften that edge a little bit. And that's looking pretty good. Maybe a couple little moments of darker color here and there. But this has the saturation I'm looking for, the depth that I'm looking for. You can see that it's a flower with multiple layers of petals. I don't want to overdo the detail with pigment because we have the black illustration details underneath that I want to be the main, detail star. Grabbing a thicker, creamier sap green consistency with my size 2 brush, and just going to add a little bit of a darker color down the center of these leaves and adding a shadow to the stem. And that really makes the stem pop away from the petal that's overlapping it. Lovely. And the sun is coming out, so we can see those colors even better. And that green is bleeding into the petal, which I love. But if you don't like it, you can use a dry brush and lift it, or a paper towel. I'm just helping it kind of tone it down a little bit by lifting some of it, but I do love when this happens. And there you go. A fun sketchbook mixed media with illustration and watercolor for a fun peony mixed media illustration. I hope you enjoyed.